Welcome everyone to Mail Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 1. It's called Future Days. So spoilers for the episode as always. And as someone who's played the games, I won't spoil stuff in the second game, but I will mention when something is from the game or something is changed from the game. But I'll try and keep it in mind as I'm talking about that stuff, not to reveal too much for those who haven't seen the or played the game. Maybe I think I did this in season one, where maybe at the end of the review, if there was something I wanted to talk about that was coming up that I thought might change because of what they'd already done in the show, maybe I'll do that at the end. But I don't think I do today. But I just for future reference as we're going through the season. So I was looking forward to season two of Last of Us because I love the games. I love the second game. Obviously, it was very divisive for a few reasons, although a lot of them are kind of just crappy reasons. There's legitimate complaints to be had. Maybe you could think it's a little too long, or whatever. But I think the second game is a really fascinating story that really builds upon the themes of the first one and really explores the idea of hatred and revenge and all that stuff. And there was a lot of questions going into this season how they would tackle it, because the game has a very specific structure that wouldn't really work for a TV show. Now, for the most part, it's not really altered that too much yet, because the way it splits up into two halves in the game hasn't quite started yet in the show. But there's already some shifting things around and a little bit of things moving in the timeline. For example, this episode's building up for a lot of it to an event, a New Year's party, which looks exactly like it did in the game. Like, they went out of their way to make this look identical in so many ways, and like lines of dialogue and stuff like that. Well, in the game, that had actually happened before the start of the game, and then we get a flashback to it sometime later. Same with the scene in this episode where Tommy is showing her how to use the sniper rifle. That was actually something that not only happened in a flashback later on in the game, it's also something that happens when she's a bit younger. It's not like right before the rest of the events of the story. Well, after the 5-year time jump, anyway. Now, there is a couple of flashbacks I do think we'll get as flashbacks later in the season, because I think they'd be crazy not to do them. But it is interesting seeing how they've worked some of them into just being in the start of the story sequentially and the way it's told. And there's some really cool little choices I think they've made here to flesh out some stuff. One of the little decisions they made early on in this episode that I really liked, aside from just picking up right after that final moment of season one, where we see kind of the initial reaction after Ellie says okay to the lie that Joel says that everything he told her was true. He lied about lying. Anyway, like, the initial reaction to that's good, and it sets up things. And of course, there's the scene with Abby and her friends making the vow to go hunt Joel down, right? Which is something in that scene. Now, I'm still in the first half of replaying the second game, so I don't remember if that scene is in the game in any way. It's definitely not at the start, though. If it happens, it's a flashback later. Because the first time you see Abby and Co, it's kind of similar to what you get at the very end of this episode, with them looking down at the town, and we kind of see they're nearby in the game. But one of the little decisions that I really like early on in this version, what they've done here, is the idea that when we first see Joel and he's like fixing like some electrical circuits or whatever, and he's also in charge of like building new homes inside Jackson, which makes sense because he was a contractor. Remember all the jokes about him being the contractor? And we get introduced to Dina, right? Played by Isabela Merced, or is it Merced? I'm not actually sure how to pronounce her last name. Unfortunately, the last thing I saw her in was Madam Web. So I'm happy to say she's doing quite well in this show so far, because the movie I saw her in last was absolutely atrocious. Not that it was her fault, but just, point of reference. One of the things I really liked here is just having this scene between Dinah and Joel. Like, because in the games, we never see them interact. Like, presumably they have interacted off camera, as it were. But Dina and Joel never really like speak on camera inside the game. So seeing them interact, I think, is interesting, because of where the story's going, giving Dina a chance to like sort of establish that she has some experience with Joel and she gets on well with them, I think is nice. But the part of that I really like, which came up a lot when Dina and Ellie team up together to go on patrol, is that this idea that Dina's kind of trying to patch things up between them and is saying, hey, maybe you could come over, I was going to watch some movies with Joel, why don't you come and do that with us? I think that's actually really sweet and a really smart way to make Dina instantly likable and instantly endearing to the audience, because she's trying to patch up the relationship that we as the audience grew attached to throughout the first season, or indeed the first game if that's your first avenue into it. And that's a new element here in the show that I really like. Not that it's a big pivot from her character in the game. She definitely seemed to care about the fact that Ellie and Joel weren't in a great place, but having her talking to both of them and trying to patch it up because she cares about Ellie. Sorry, because she cares about Ellie. I'm struggling to speak here. I actually think that's a really inspired little choice to make it easy to really instantly like her, because she's basically a new character, right? There was obviously a glimpse of a young girl in season 1 that we all kind of pointed at and went, is that Dina? Is that them teasing Dina for the second season? But this is the real first introduction to her. This is really getting to know her. And I think that was a really smart choice. And the chemistry between her and Ellie is really good. She has the same kind of attitude with her. That's very, again, endearing, and they're playful, they're kind of goading each other on, taking chances and having fun in a world that they're both very used to, this dangerous world they live in, and they kind of maybe take too many chances in it. But that's kind of funny. You can sort of tell that Ellie likes her romantically and doesn't think that she's got a chance because she thinks Dina's with other people, or with men, specifically with Dina. There's a great little moment where Dina's saying, hey, you're going to go to the New Year's thing, and Ellie says no, and she's like, well, are you not going with her? And her name's Kat, she points to. And Ellie's like, no, why would I ask her? And she basically says, because she's the other one, meaning the other gay woman in the town, because it's, even though they've taken on a lot of people, it's still a relatively small population, and therefore there's not a lot of other lesbians in the group. But obviously at this point, Dina probably already knows that she's got feelings for her, and it seems like Jesse might even have an idea. Maybe not specifically that she's got feelings for Ellie, maybe he does, but just the idea that the reason why they keep breaking up is perhaps because Dina's heart lies elsewhere. But regardless, these little moments between them I thought were really good and felt very kind of I bought into the relationship instantly, which is something you really appreciate that when you watch other shows or movies that just fail miserably to make you care about two characters being attracted to each other. I think just little moments of when Dina's helping Ellie put on her gun strap and she's getting really close, and you can just sort of tell from Ellie's reaction that she's kind of, she's really close. You can smell her, and it's kind of a moment, but she's trying to maintain composure. Or the similar idea later on when they're dancing, of course, but things are actually heating up at that point, and it kind of becomes a bit more overt that there's feelings on display. And a lot of that dialogue in that scene when they're dancing is straight from the game. Both from them being romantic with each other to the guy that comes in and insults them, which, by the way, that actor is from Person of Interest. He also played RoboCop in RoboCop 3, which is not the good one, but just a little bit of trivia for you. So I like seeing all that play out. I thought it was well handled. The scenes they kind of copied from the games between Ellie and Joel, I think, work really well, and they make you wait for Ellie and Joel to be together in this episode, and it kind of mirrors how Joel's feeling, which also makes it really smart writing, because you're kind of excited to see them together again, but Joel is actively frustrated because she's kind of shunned him out a little bit. She's kind of just being like a bratty teenager who doesn't want to talk to her dad, and they reference that that's kind of normal for a lot of the episode. But this actually leads to one of the new things they've added here, at least unless I'm forgetting something. It's always possible that there's flashbacks late in the second game that I've forgotten about, but I don't think I have in this case, and that is that Joel is going to a therapist, played by Catherine O'Hara, otherwise known as Kevin McAllister's mum, and that's who she'll always be to me. But he goes to this therapy session, and he's frustrated with Ellie that she's not paying attention to him, she's kind of ignoring him, yada yada yada. And we see even the scene with Dina where he's so ready to spill his guts and talk about it, even though it's very hard for him. It's like he wants to spill his guts, but he's got these just walls that are up that past a certain point it will not happen. And that's kind of what happens in the scene with the therapist, where the therapist kind of admits that Joel killed her husband, presumably because he was infected and he was a clicker or a runner or whatever. But she still kind of hates Joel for it. And a big part of this scene, and the irony of it, if you will, is that she is kind of been holding back something she wants to say to Joel, and she admits all this, and she's kind of saying, hey, now that I've said it, and it was so scary to say this out loud, to tell you that I hate you for murdering my husband, as much as she understands the logic of why he did it, right? So again, assuming it's an infected thing, I can't imagine what the other reason would be that she'd accept. She's like, now that I've said the scary thing, I can start to process it. I've admitted why I'm feeling this way. I've admitted what the problem is, and maybe I can start to move on. And Joel, there's something that you're lying about. You're not telling me everything. There's something that you're concealing. And we know he's concealing something. He's concealing the fact that he lied to Ellie about being immune, and that he killed everyone at the hospital and saved her and lied to her and took away the one thing she was hopeful for at the time in order to save her. Now, we could debate till the end of the day who was right or wrong in the scenario, of course, for a variety of reasons. I'm sure we talked about that back in the finale of season 1. But the idea here is he can't say it. But there's a great moment here in the performance from Pascal where he tears up like he's almost willing to say it. Like he's almost ready to admit, because it's the right thing to do, is to finally admit it to someone. But he can't. He sort of like stands up, and he says, I saved her. That is because the way she phrases it is like, did you do something to her? And he kind of like indicates yes. And she says, did you hurt her? And he's like, no, like, making it clear it's nothing like that. So she's like, okay, but what did you do? What was it? And, there's that moment where it feels like he's almost like wanting to free his burden. He's almost wanting to confess and like ask for forgiveness, basically. But he can't do it. He can't admit to it. He even now, he is so stern and still Joel. For all of his like positives and faults, he is still Joel, and he still won't admit it, and he still, armors up, metaphorically speaking, and won't do it. So I really love this moment. I think this was like a great addition that isn't in the game, that adds a lot and still works with everything that they have taken from the games, which is really nice. And there's kind of like a weird vibe to a lot of this as well, where that all this hanging out with Tommy is kind of being kept secret from him. Tommy doesn't want to admit it to him, and even some of the interactions between him and Ellie is this idea that Ellie and Joel are a lot alike. Like her stubbornness in demanding to be on patrol, to the point where Ellie says, "Well, if we're alike, I'm going to win this." And Tommy gives in because he always gives in to his brother. Like, it's actually kind of, again, endearing in a weird way to sort of like see their similarities come out, and the fact that they're both so stubborn is a big part of what makes them work together, but it also is why they conflict so much. And we see some other details about town, like the rebuilding the houses. Maria wants Joel to build faster, but it's not very possible. And Joel kind of suggests maybe we should stop taking people in. Like, we're kind of struggling here to build fast enough to like have places for people to live. And she kind of shuts that down and reminds him before he leaves that he was a refugee as well once. And because he says, look, if the lifeboat is starting to sink, we can't take any more people in. That's just the way it has to work. You have to take care of your own first, or you're no good to no one. But she tries to remind him, yeah, but you were a refugee once before. Although notably, that response comes after the nephew has come in, Tommy's son, who's like a little kid, and then Tommy himself comes in. And there's a lot of like fun, playful Joel being an uncle to this kid, and he's very good with the kid. Like, all that stuff is really good. And then like Maria just throws that little reminder at him at the end, like, hey, we took you in when we didn't have to once upon a time. But also, it's not even like she's trying to make him feel like an outsider, because clearly they've been here for 5 years, right? We're 5 years since the end of the first season here. And she makes a point of saying at one point earlier in this scene, when Joel refers to your council, like, your council decides this, and Maria throws back at him, our council. Like, so it's not like Maria's like trying to exclude him and make him feel like, hey, we took you in, you're an outsider, be thankful. That's not the point she's making. She's just making the point that once upon a time, he was taken in, but she was also in the same very scene reminding him, hey, no, you're part of this community. You're part of the decision making here, and this is what's happening. So really fun stuff. The whole, so I was like sort of assuming when Ellie and Dina went out on patrol, it was the patrol from the start of the second game, but they'd moved it to before the New Year's party. Turns out, though, that still seems to be happening, because they reference that they're going to have an early morning patrol the next day, and given how that intersects with other things that happen in that part of the story, I suspect that's what a lot of episode 2 is going to be. unless they add a lot of new stuff, of course. But it turns out we got this extra little bit. However, they did borrow a location. So the location that they go to with this other little party when they're looking for any runners or stragglers, and they find the bear, and then Ellie and Dina ultimately go inside the supermarket. That is a location from the second game early on. It's not, this particular scene's not in the second game, but this location is there a little bit later when Ellie and Dina are out on their own. So I think, you know, they're sort of taking things. And then the other big thing they've taken here is the introduction of this new enemy type, this new infected type, the Stalker, I believe they're called. They said that later on in the episode. This is interesting because this enemy I don't think appears in the game until fairly late in. To put it in perspective, in my replay right now, I'm about 8 or 9 hours in, and I've still not encountered one. So they've made a conscious choice here to introduce this enemy at the start of the season. In fact, the tease towards the end that the roots from the spores that might let all the infected know where this town is coming through the pipe, that's also new. I mean, that entire idea in the first season was new, that like if you step on one of the, you know, one of the parts of the fungus or whatever, it would alert like the local like enemies that you're around. That was a new idea, and this is new here. So this idea that there's a threat to the town is something that seems to be completely new, unless I'm forgetting something, but I don't think I am. So that's interesting as well. But this idea of introducing the Stalker, I was quite cool, because, and I especially like how they did it here, and they also brought in some other things from even the first game here that they hadn't done a lot of in season 1. Because season 1 had like some really great scenes with the runners, and especially a couple of big cool scenes with the clickers, and they really treated it like big events where you only had a couple of them in the entire season. So one of the things we didn't get in season 1 that you do a lot in the games is like stealth killing a licker. Or a licker, sorry, that's Resident Evil, not Last of Us, a clicker. You do it a lot in the game where you sneak up behind a clicker with a knife and you stab them, or in the first game it was a shiv specifically. And that was like a big part, that was a big mechanic in the game. And so a lot of those areas where there's clickers around, you'd be like, you know, hunched over, you'd be hiding around counters, and you'd be trying to get to them without making a sound so that you could kill them without them becoming too much of a threat. Now, the first season I don't think did anything quite like that, and they were treated as very dangerous. But I like this idea that in season 2, it's like, okay, Ellie and Dina as well, seemingly, for 5 years, have been getting better and better and more confident at dealing with these enemies. So I actually got kind of excited when they made the choice, as much as you could say they were being kind of stupid about it, when they put their guns away and pulled out the knife, I was like, oh, are they going to take on a clicker with a knife? Because that's something you do in the games, but naturally in the TV show, you want to make them feel threatening, you don't want it to make it feel too easy. But it kind of makes sense that for season 2, you're introducing new enemy types, and you're also saying that these people are better at fighting these things. They've gotten more efficient, they've gotten good at how to deal with them. So we get a very classic game-like scene of Ellie sneaking up behind the clicker, but making a little bit too much noise. So even though throwing the bottle to distract them is a big thing in the game, and she's almost going to do that, she doesn't quite get to do it because she steps on a creaky board. But she jumps on the clicker and stabs it to death, and it felt like a really cool thing to take in from the game that they could have put in season 1, but it kind of felt cool to do it here because it was like a nice little... I think that's the smart thing about this episode, is there's a lot of character building, and it's arguably what the show's best at, but it's also good at those big like horror movie clicker scenes and stuff like that. So I think it was a really wise choice to get like find a way to give us a cool, you know, horror scene from The Last of Us in this first episode. Because I think it doesn't matter so much going forward if every episode doesn't have some of the elements because you're focusing on one particular thing. But I think in the first episode of the season, you want to give the audience a taste of everything. You want to give the audience a taste of all the things that make Last of Us what it is and what makes it great. So I think that makes a lot of sense here for me. And then, of course, Ellie falls through the floor and encounters the Stalker. And the whole thing here is that normally, and we see them relying on this, like Ellie and Dina are listening for clickers and runners, and they even kind of deduce like how many there might be based on just the sounds. And we even see that they're so good at being quiet that they do a lot of like basically sign language to each other, forming a plan of how to take on the clicker so they don't alert it. So immediately after this, though, they're so cocky, they're so confident, they're treating it like a game. Ellie's put in a situation with this new type of enemy that doesn't make sound. At least not much. Like, yeah, it might make sound by accident at some point, but it's crawling around. There's a lot of shots here where Ellie's looking at the magazine from the 90s or whatever, and you see like the stalker crawling above the fridges or whatever it is in the background. And it's just, full on horror movie stuff with this thing. And a big part of the stalkers in the game is where they sort of like are around the corner of like a shelf or something, and they'll be sticking their head out, but then they won't come out. They'll make you come to them, and you have to kind of like, it's a very different enemy to fight. And they definitely pulled that off here, where they kind of showed that, no, this thing's trying to hunt her. It's trying to lure her in. It's smarter, as she puts it when she's explaining it later. And then the other thing that's new here, actually, because Ellie obviously ultimately wins, but she gets bit. And it's interesting to me to make this choice, because I guess it's reestablishing for people who watched the first season, just to remind everyone. There's also that moment where she's with Tommy and she yells out, "I'm immune," and she's frustrated that she can't tell anyone about that, but she's kind of sworn to secrecy between her, Joel, and Tommy, that it's something they should keep to themselves for various reasons. But her being bit is interesting because it's something that didn't happen in the second game. We know she'll be fine, of course, but it is interesting her having to like hide it from Dina and then intentionally cut out like more like of a wound later on so that it doesn't look like a bite mark. Like we see her like it's basically cutting through where the bite is so that it's a scar that's a straight line and or whatever. She's trying to obscure the fact that it was a bite, because people will ask too many questions if anyone ever sees a bite mark, and that's a big problem. But we also see that she's got a tattoo that covers her original bite, and that scar that she has, that's something that's in the games as well. She has that tattoo. So all that stuff is interesting, and then this also leads to them telling the council, right, with Tommy and Maria and the others, about this new enemy that's quiet, that's intelligent, that uses tactics to hunt. And maybe it's a one-off, but who knows? Interestingly, Maria can tell that Dina's lying about also seeing it, but believes that Ellie did see it and kind of trusts that this is a real accurate report. Although there is a really funny bit here, and this is actually something they did once or twice in season 1, where when Tommy gives Ellie some shit for like being reckless and not following the rules and going into the building, Ellie says, "What, you and Joel would have went in?" And he's like, "That's different." And Ellie's like, "How?" "It just is." And then Maria turns and looks at him and goes, "Yeah, how is it different?" And he just kind of like shuts up. I like, Maria's also very likable. Like, Maria's got this way of like just being this logical voice that will point out when a character is kind of up themselves a little bit and is kind of like deluding themselves by trying to pretend that they know what they're talking about, or that they're covering up for something, and she'll call them out on it. And it's just it's something that happened a few times. The one that I always remember from season 1 is when they're talking about whether or not their community is a communism, or it's a commune, but like, is this communism? And he has to sort of wrestle with the idea. Yeah, it kind of is. And he's like, "Wait, what? We're communists? Oh no." "I'm from Texas." So like, that felt like a nice little follow up to that kind of like relationship that they have in that scene, which I really, really liked. So no, I mean, I think the tension between Joel and Ellie is really good. I already kind of talked about the party scene, or the dance scene, which is just taken right out of the game. Like, it feels beat for beat from what I remember from there. Visuals, the lines of dialogue, and Dina saying Ellie saying, "Every guy here is looking at you," and she's like, "Maybe they're jealous of you," and she's like, "I'm not a threat. Why would they be?" And then Dina leans in and says, "They should be effing terrified of you," and that's when they end up kissing. And it's a really sweet moment. It's very likable, and I think this episode did a really good job of establishing the key relationships and the new characters, that being Dina and Jesse. Re-establishing and sort of seeing where all the other characters are with each other. How Joel is with Ellie right now, how Tommy is with Joel, how Tommy is with Ellie. Like, all of these like various pairings all feel like they're just a little bit further fleshed out. And it feels like, knowing what's to come broadly, because I've played the game, it does feel like they've set the stage for a lot of the drama, a lot of the character stuff that is coming. And there was something that I thought may happen at the end of this first episode. Now, it didn't, and I kind of knew about halfway through that it wasn't going to happen by the end of the first episode. I do think the end of the second episode is a very big possibility. unless they add in a lot more things that that I can't predict. But it seems like, based on what they said they were doing the next day, that the next day is going to lead to something which the next episode is probably going to cut to credits on, would be my expectation. I could be wrong, and people who have played the game know what I'm talking about. But yeah, honestly, the funny thing about Last of Us, the TV show, is that season 1 was really good. Like, it was shockingly good, and probably the only video game adaptation that I've truly... Well, actually, that's not true. I enjoyed Fallout, but Fallout's a kind of a different beast because it's not actually like adapting a story from the game. It's just kind of taking the world and doing its own things with those ideas. And because I actually think the gameplay in Fallout's a little bit boring and kind of whatever, I kind of enjoyed the show more. I think this is a really interesting one because there's such a strict story that they're adapting. And I think season 1 did such a good job of adding its own flourishes, the Bill episode being the big example. But the funny thing is that at the end of the season, I think my excitement for season 2 was a little muted because my least favorite part of season 1 was the final episode. I think the final episode, particularly how they handled Joel's rampage through the hospital, was the one big thing they decided to do, or how they decided to do it, was something that I thought was a little bit off from how I personally felt about that moment in the games. It didn't quite match what I thought it should feel, and it was the only thing the entire season that felt off. But because that was basically the last thing, it kind of muted my expectations a little bit and almost made me forget how good the rest of the show was. And I think the fact that I was so engrossed in this episode for just, Joel going to therapy and the tension of that scene ramping up and him almost admitting something but not quite getting there. Just the little characteristics they put into the various pairings, particularly Ellie and Dina. I think Ellie and Dina, they had to nail that here. To make me care, because their relationship's a big part of this story, and I think they did. I think right away their chemistry's off the charts. It feels like they're there for each other. It feels like they, in the first season, Joel and all the characters around his age were all from the old world. They're all from our world who remember civilization. But here we have Ellie with someone who's a similar age, who's grown up and maybe remembers stuff from childhood. Perhaps, although arguably not. Well, actually, not really. Because when the time jump at the start of the first game/season, it's like a 20-year time jump. So yeah, Ellie's just grown up entirely in the post-apocalyptic world, and so is Dina. And I think seeing her with a peer who's had a very kind of similar experience, to a point, obviously, not the exact same experience, but has grown up in the same world, and seeing how they're surviving and coping in it is such a well-done thing. Here, where you get this dynamic, you get them playing off of each other, and it feels so different to the relationships that they have with the other characters. I think it's so well written in that respect. It really has a strong understanding of the characters and who they are in this world, and kind of what we can explore through them in terms of how this world exists and the type of people that are left, what they've had to do to survive, and how their dynamics have changed. So yeah, I'm excited to see that. And it is also interesting, of course, that the villainous group that we see, led by Abby, who's vowed to kill Joel slowly, as she quite so put it, they're also seemingly a similar age, maybe slightly older, but probably all grown up in the post-apocalyptic world. So this is very much like all of this generation that we're mainly following this season are the new guard, and not the old guard. And I think that's an interesting little thematic thing to pay attention to. So, no, it was very good. I am very excited. I love that it's a weekly show. It's a little bit of a bummer. It's only 7 episodes. I know that's because they're doing the game, the second game's quite long, so they're doing it over 2 seasons, I think. They've renewed it for that 3rd season already, so we don't have to worry about getting it. But I do wonder what the gap's going to be like in between and what they use as the breaking point, the cliffhanger. I'm actually not sure right now. Maybe if I think about it, I'll have a good idea. But no, let me know what you thought of this episode, the Season 2 premiere of Last of Us, in the comments. And of course, you can help out and support the channel and keep all the content coming, both here and over in MailFuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts live that I do with other people. Via patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, where you can support for $5 or more per month and help keep everything coming. You can also support via YouTube membership if that's more your thing. But thank you very much for joining, and yeah, Last of Us is back, and it was just great hearing the music again and being in that world and feeling the vibes. And I also, just a final note, I guess, I love the transition to the scene with Abby and her friends at the graves. They sort of transitioned there using the giraffes. I thought that was a very neat point. Also, Ellie's making a journal, which she also does in the game. That's another little detail. Or in the shot of her taking the knife out of the table is also from the game. Although that's something that she was going to do tomorrow morning. So I wonder if they'll do something else or they'll repeat it. But either way, that's the review of the first episode. Thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?